In our last dossier, we explored how crows construct architectural black sites to hide their technological advancements. We learned that if a spy breaches the perimeter, the inventor executes a scorched earth protocol and abandons their own tool. But the defense mechanism does not end there. When a black site falls, the inventor does not just fly away. Before they retreat, they look the intruder in the eye. They use a highly advanced visual cortex to scan the geometric architecture of the intruder's face. They log the biometric data, and then they upload that profile to a decentralized generational database. If a human thief steals your property, they leave a digital footprint on a server. If you anger the wrong community on the internet, you get doxxed. Your face, your routines, and your identity are broadcast to thousands of hostile strangers. We assume this level of targeted, networked harassment is exclusively human, but in the canopy, there is no delete button. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how crows built a living surveillance network that has no off switch, no server to pull the plug on, and no legal loophole to exploit. Today, we are opening the file on the most terrifying surveillance network on Earth. We are going to examine the infamous Seattle Caveman Experiments, decode the acoustic frequencies these birds use to transmit your face to other flocks, and uncover the chilling reality that if you are marked as a threat today, their unborn grandchildren will exact revenge. This is biological doxing, and the crows have been running it longer than we have been writing things down. To prove that this biological database actually exists, we have to travel to the University of Washington. In 2006, a wildlife biologist named John Marzluff suspected that crows were not just recognizing threats by their clothes, their height, or their gait. He believed they were mathematically analyzing specific facial bone structure. He did not just want to know if they remembered people. He wanted to test the exact limits of their biometric scanners. So he initiated what is now known as the Caveman Protocol. Here is exactly what that looked like. Marzluff and his team acquired two distinct rubber masks. The first was a hyper-realistic caveman face, with deep-set brow ridges, a wide jaw, and exaggerated bone structure. The second was a neutral, featureless human face, designed to register as completely non-threatening. These two masks would serve as the experimental control system. Researchers wearing the caveman mask trapped and banded wild crows on the University of Washington campus. Trapping is a stressful, traumatic event for any bird. It involves being physically restrained, handled, and fitted with a metal identification band around one leg. From the crow's perspective, the being wearing that caveman face had just committed a violent act against them. The mask became the face of the aggressor. The mask became the threat profile. What happened next is where the science becomes something you cannot explain away with simple instinct. When researchers later walked across the same campus wearing the neutral mask, the crows completely ignored them. No alarm calls, no dive bombing, no response whatsoever. The neutral mask triggered no threat classification in the bird's memory systems. But when those same researchers walked across campus wearing the caveman mask, the response was immediate and violent. Crows mobbed the mask wearer. They swooped low, cawed aggressively, and followed the researcher across the entire campus. This was not a random territorial display. These birds had identified a specific face and categorized it as a Tier 1 hostile entity. Now, here is the part that separates crow cognition from almost every other non-human animal on the planet. The behavior was driven by a region of the avian brain called the nidopallium caudolaterale. This structure processes complex visual information in a way that is functionally identical to the human fusiform gyrus, which is the region of our temporal lobe responsible for facial recognition in humans. The fusiform gyrus does not just see a face as a collection of features. It maps the geometric relationships between those features. The distance between the eyes relative to the width of the nose. The angle of the jaw relative to the height of the cheekbones. It builds a mathematical spatial map of a face and stores it as a distinct, retrievable identity file. The crow's nidopallium does the same thing. It is not remembering the color of your shirt. It is not tracking the sound of your footsteps. It is running a geometric facial analysis and filing the result under threat or non-threat. This is not a metaphor. This is the actual biological mechanism. Corvid neuroanatomy researchers have confirmed through imaging studies that these birds activate distinct neural pathways when processing familiar versus unfamiliar human faces, specifically in response to threat-associated individuals. The Caveman Protocol proved beyond any reasonable scientific doubt that a crow's brain operates like a biological face scanner. It captures, processes, and stores human facial geometry with a precision that most people would refuse to believe is possible in an animal without a prefrontal cortex. But the truly unnerving part of the experiment was not the individual recognition. Individual recognition is impressive, but it is not unique to crows. Dogs recognize faces. Elephants recognize faces. The truly terrifying part was what happened to that caveman face data after it was filed inside a single bird's brain. It did not stay there. The experiment proved that crows could lock onto a specific face out of a crowd. But a facial profile is useless if the data stays localized to a single bird. The true horror of the experiment was what happened next. The data started to spread. During the initial trapping event, only 7 individual crows saw the caveman mask. 7 birds experienced the trauma directly. 7 birds filed the caveman face under active threat in their biological memory systems. But within weeks, researchers walking across campus in the mask were being dive-bombed by dozens of crows. Crows that had never been trapped. Crows that had never even seen the mask before. Crows that had no personal history with the caveman face whatsoever. They instantly recognized it as a Tier 1 threat and launched coordinated attacks. How does a bird that has never met you know that you are a threat? Because the original victims did not just hold a grudge. They uploaded the data to the Scold network. When a crow encounters a threat-flagged face, it does not process the experience silently. It broadcasts. The bird produces what researchers call a scolding call, and this acoustic signal is not simply a generic alarm. It is not the avian equivalent of screaming in a crowded room. It carries structured, specific information. Corvid researchers who have analyzed the acoustic structure of crow scolding calls have found that these vocalizations vary in measurable ways depending on the specific type of threat being communicated. The frequency, duration, and pattern of a scold issued at a known dangerous human is distinct from the scold directed at a hawk, a cat, or a rival crow. Other crows in the vicinity do not just hear that a threat exists. They receive a classified signal that contains data about the nature and identity of the threat itself. Now think about this in network terms. The 7 crows who encountered the caveman mask become the original nodes in a distributed system. When they produce a structured threat scold in the presence of the caveman face, every crow within acoustic range receives that signal. Those crows do not need to have seen the face themselves. They do not need to have experienced the trauma. They lock onto the behavioral cue of the scolding crow and follow its gaze or flight trajectory toward the target. The moment they see the face that triggered the scold, their visual system cross-references it. Caveman face plus aggressive scold from known flock member equals confirmed threat. Their brain files it. Now, they are nodes in the network. Now they can broadcast the same signal to the next wave of birds. This is precisely how a peer-to-peer data mesh works. There is no central server. There is no single crow that holds all the information and distributes it. The data propagates outward through direct contact and acoustic chain signals, replicating itself across an expanding geographic network of receivers who each become rebroadcasters. Crow territories can stretch across multiple city blocks. A single flock's acoustic range can cover an area large enough to encompass thousands of human beings going about their daily routines. The caveman face data, originating with 7 birds at a single location on the University of Washington campus, spread across that entire acoustic mesh within weeks. The face was no longer filed in 7 brains. It was filed in dozens. And those dozens were each capable of rebroadcasting the signal to dozens more. The network does not degrade as it expands. Each new node that confirms the threat identity by visually encountering the face and pairing it with a received scold actually reinforces the data packet. The signal becomes stronger, more stable, and more widely distributed with each propagation cycle. Your biometric data has now been uploaded to the regional network. You might think, I will just wait it out. Eventually, the birds that saw me will pass away. But a decentralized ledger does not just spread geographically. it spreads generationally. A decade after the initial experiment, John Marzluff's team walked through the campus wearing the caveman mask. They were met with an absolute deafening roar of over 50 furious crows. Here's the chilling reality of that encounter. The original crows that were trapped had died of old age. Their biological lifespans had expired. Almost every single crow in that mob had not even been born when the original trapping took place. But their hatred survived. The data survived. This is the part of the crow intelligence story that most researchers struggle to communicate without it sounding like science fiction. How does a bird that was hatched years after a traumatic event carry a grudge against the face responsible for that event? The answer lies in a process called cultural transmission. And it is one of the most extraordinary things happening in the animal kingdom right now. In trees above your head, in parks you walk through every morning, adult crows teach their fledglings to recognize threats through active behavioral demonstration. When a parent crow encounters the caveman face and produces a threat scold, the fledgling is watching. It observes the parent's posture, the direction of their gaze, the specific acoustic pattern of the scold, and the face that triggered all of it. The young bird's developing nidopallium begins mapping the geometry of that face, not because it experienced trauma, but because a trusted adult in its social group demonstrated unambiguous fear and aggression toward it. This is social learning at a neurological level. The young crow is not simply imitating the parent's behavior. It is constructing its own internal threat profile of the same face based on secondhand observational data. The face gets filed in the fledgling's brain under confirmed threat, processed by the same facial geometry recognition systems that handled the original 7 birds' first-hand experience. The quality of the threat data does not degrade during this transfer. A young crow that learned to hate the caveman, face through parental demonstration, will scold that face with the same intensity and specificity as a crow that was actually trapped and banded. From a behavioral standpoint, the data is identical. The origin of the data, whether first-hand trauma or second-hand instruction, does not weaken the classification. Think about this the way you would think about copying files between drives. If you have a corrupted data file on one hard drive and you copy it to a new drive, the new drive does not know the file is corrupted. It simply stores and reads the data as received. The corruption is preserved perfectly in the copy. The fledgling crow is a new drive. The threat profile is the corrupted file. The copy is exact, and here's where the timeline becomes genuinely disturbing. Crows in the wild can live for up to around 15 years. In that 15-year lifespan, a single adult crow will raise multiple clutches of fledglings. Each of those fledglings learns the current threat registry, which includes every flagged face that has been in active circulation in the flock's acoustic network during the parent's lifetime. Those fledglings grow up, become adults, and raise their own fledglings. They teach their young the same threat registry, now one generation further removed from the original traumatic event. The caveman face, which was filed by 7 living birds in 2006, was still being actively taught to newly hatched crows more than a decade later, long after every bird that touched it with their own eyes during the original trapping was dead. This is not a metaphor for generational trauma. This is the literal, documented biological mechanism of generational memory in a non-human species. The University of Washington's own research team confirmed that the scolding response to the caveman mask had not weakened with time. It had actually gotten stronger as more birds had been added to the network over the years. The signal had not degraded. It had amplified. You cannot outrun the network. You cannot outlive the grudge. So, if you realize your face is on the biological hit list, can you delete your data? Can you execute a forgiveness protocol? The answer is yes, but apologies mean nothing to a system built on caloric economics. You have to engage in high-level biological bribery. And even then, the process is slow, deliberate, and entirely on the crow's timeline, not yours. The first thing you need to understand is what constitutes a high-value offering in crow caloric economics. Unsalted peanuts still in the shell are the most consistently documented high-value food item used in successful crow relationship repair. The shell matters for 2 reasons. First, it requires the crow to perform a manual operation to extract the food, which increases the cognitive engagement with the offering. Second, peanuts in the shell can be cached, meaning the crow can carry them away and store them for later. A food item that can be cached has higher survival value to a crow than one that must be consumed immediately. You are not just feeding them. You are providing them with a resource they can invest. The offering alone is not sufficient. The delivery method is what begins to reclassify your threat status in their system. When you place food for a crow that has flagged you as a threat, you must practice what researchers describe as gaze avoidance. Direct eye contact from a crow's perspective registers as a challenge or an assertion of dominance. It is a threat signal. If you place food and then stare at the bird while it decides whether to approach, you are broadcasting aggression with your eyes, even as you offer a resource with your hand. The correct protocol is to place the food on the ground, take several deliberate steps backward, and then look away or turn your body at an angle that removes you from the bird's direct sightline. You are communicating through body language that you are not a predator making a calculated ambush. You are demonstrating submission. You are saying, with your posture and your gaze, that this resource is theirs without condition. Crows are extraordinarily good at reading this kind of behavioral signaling. They have been watching human body language for thousands of years of cohabitation with our species. They know what a relaxed, non-threatening human body looks like, and they know what a tense, predatory one looks like. Your job during the forgiveness protocol is to consistently perform the former. Here's the hard reality of the timeline involved. A single positive encounter is not going to update the ledger. The threat classification your face carries has been reinforced every time a flock member has scolded in your presence, every time another bird has confirmed the threat profile by sight, and every time that data has been rebroadcast across the acoustic network. Overwriting that classification requires a sustained countersignal. Researchers who have documented successful relationship repair between flagged humans and crow flocks report that consistent, daily provisioning over a period of several months is typically required before the flock begins to show measurable de-escalation in their threat response. The acoustic ledger updates slowly. As more birds observe you providing food without aggression, and as fewer birds produce intense threat scolds in your presence, the network begins to reclassify you. You are no longer a creature that causes trauma. You have become what crow behavioral researchers call a subservient resource. That is not a compliment in human terms, but in crow terms, it is the safest category a flagged human can hope to be filed under. It means the flock has reevaluated the return on investment of spending energy attacking you, and decided that your caloric contributions outweigh the threat history on your file. The process is not guaranteed. Some flocks in densely connected acoustic networks have demonstrated persistent threat responses, even toward humans who have sustained provisioning attempts for extended periods. If your face has propagated too deeply through too many acoustic nodes, the countersignal generated by your local provisioning efforts may be insufficient to override the broader network classification. This is the equivalent of issuing a retraction that reaches only a fraction of the people who saw the original accusation. The Seattle experiments proved that crows can dox human threats. They can track the faces of rival spies from other flocks. But what happens when the threat is not a human? And what happens when the spy is not a rival from across the valley? What happens when the spy stealing your technology is sitting right next to you on the branch? When every crow looks the same, how do you know who you can trust within your own family? You do not. You trust no one, and you actively interrogate them. To see how innovator crows intentionally feed false information to their own flock, and the brutal psychological traps they set to expose the traitors among them, click the video on your screen right now. The mole hunt has begun. I will see you in there.